Oh, hey, we're getting unwhelmed.
I'm holding my phone for my notes because I'm just sitting here quietly. This is quiet. But this is where Susie comes in today. We are going to talk about cannabis use because Susie likes to say that she has been in a long-term committed relationship with cannabis for over 25 years, which means she is an expert in its use and more importantly to the legalization and normalization of marijuana. Susie has been involved with NORML, the National Organization to Reform Marijuana Laws, for a number of years, and she is the founder of Future. It's Cannabis.
Further.
Good
It's called
God.
Further.
I'm just gonna let Susie introduce her company in a
Back
per
to one.
cannabis education. Thank God you have your own PR firm. But before we
Yeah.
jump into our conversation with Susie, we're going to do our normal grounding stuff.
Right.
And so, what I'd like you to do is I'm going to set my coffee down so I can kick that later. Find a comfortable position, make sure your booty is centered, make sure your shoulders are straight, and your head and neck and spine are all aligned. And if you are comfortable, feel free to close your eyes or rest your gaze softly somewhere in your environment. And when you're ready, take a big deep breath in through your nose and out. And in and out on a sigh. Let your breathing return to normal. And I invite you to do a quick body scan. And as you're breathing in and out, recognize where the air is traveling through your body. You may feel it in your nose or in the back of your throat or in your chest as your ribs expand, all the way down into your belly, into your diaphragm. And as you're noticing where the breath is, I invite you to fill every one of those spaces from the bottom up. So breathe in and feel your diaphragm, feel your belly soften, feel your rib cage expand, feel your shoulders drop, your throat open, and as you exhale, push from the diaphragm out. Feel the air leaving your throat, leaving your lungs, constricting in your ribs and pushing from the diaphragm. And know that as you are noticing this breath and as you are expanding and deepening the breath, you are slowing your heart rate. You are increasing your ability to pay attention. You're increasing your ability to pay attention to what's in front of you, to stay present. You're supporting your parasympathetic nervous system. You're supporting digestion, emotion, critical thought. So anytime throughout the day that you feel that you are struggling in any of those areas, I invite you to return here to breath, knowing that you can support all of your health right here centered in breath. One more big breath in and out. And when you're ready, welcome back to the space. Thank you. Susie Kandt, welcome to the program. Would you please
Thank you.
guide us to rescue the introduction of your company?
So I work, the name of my company is called Further, Pure and Applied Cannabis Education. And the idea is, the theory, the Further bus, which was kind of a psychedelic icon of the 60s, which was about mind expansion, but it also, in our case, talks about, expanding, cannabis education and normalization of the culture throughout. Right now we're doing, I'm state sponsored and, or I mean, state certified. And right now I'm doing this regulatory training for dispensaries, and then, offering supplemental cannabis education courses and marketing services and communications for the cannabis industry in Massachusetts. So
Perfect.
that's what I'm doing now.
That's
Yeah.
really cool. Can you talk just for a minute about what other kinds of educations you talked about regulatory training for cannabis dispensaries? Can you talk about the other
Mhm.
kinds of education you can provide both for dispensaries and consumers?
Oh gosh. Well, a lot of in Massachusetts, which is the state where I'm operating out of, uh, the dispensaries, anybody that's registered as a license holder in the state of Massachusetts has to have all of their employees and volunteers and owners, even like people, regular visitors, be registered as agents of the Cannabis Control Commission. And all of those people are required to have this responsible vendor training within 90 days of hire, and then annually after that. So I get to teach them that. Um, but in addition, the regulatory requirements on the dispensary owners to offer public education and consumer education is also very entrenched out here in the States, in particular in Massachusetts. And then there's also host community agreements, which are these, it's kind of like a deal that's been that is established between the town and the dispensary owner, which basically says, for the first 5 years, I'll give you 3% of all of our retail sales. And of that 3%, 20% of it will be spent on community education and, enriching the public with information about cannabis health and wellness, as well as alternative prevention, drug prevention for the harder stuff. So there's a real kind of market for it. In addition to, I really believe in an informed consumer is a very is a satisfied one, smart one. And for women especially, we're the ones in our communities that people turn to most for advice, because we are trusted pillars of counsel and networking in our communities. And so I really enjoy bringing the hallmarks of the cannabis community into everyone's life, and inviting everyone to kind of join in the open-hearted goodness of the plant and what she can do for humanity. How about that?
That's very cool. That's very cool.
Yeah.
I don't think we think about cannabis as something that's ripe for education more than what the sort of traditional education about marijuana is, which is how to keep people from using it. Um,
Well, yeah, and that's an interesting point. You're kind of describing the prohibition of cannabis, and like the propaganda that was kind of used to perpetuate a lot of the scandals of the path to legalization for marijuana. You know, that's kind of like the reefer madness element of what we all remember about marijuana, and the stigmatization that comes with being being seen as a cannabis user, and how trying to normalize that. I think that the more I have a sticker on my refrigerator that says I'm cleverly disguised as a responsible adult. Um, but it's also part of acknowledging that, we're all out here. And like my dad used to say, I remember my dad one time was watching town meeting. It was like a TV store investigative meeting show on back home, and they were talking about Ted Bundy at the time. And somebody had said, all I know is that the defendant had pornography on his coffee table. And my dad shouted at the TV, and I bet he had a gallon of milk in the refrigerator too, lady. And I remember being like, oh my God, he's right. And it really kind of gave me a lot of more, a different way of seeing the world, in terms of understanding the deep, complex humanity of all of us. So And cannabis is all about that for me.
I know that
What was the question?
well, we were talking about those propaganda and that societal messaging, which from any one of us of a certain age remembers the DARE program and its incredible
Right,
ironclad message of zero tolerance, zero use. So rather than teaching
right,
kids, that there is such a thing as responsible use, we teach them you can't or you shouldn't. And so, of course, they do. And then it wraps all of those messages. If you use marijuana or any other substance, you're suddenly a bad person. So
right.
it's not just the
Even though they're off to go get coffee and 2 sugar donuts and then have wine after work.
point. Yes, exactly. Right. So
Hmm.
alcohol use is more than normalized. Alcohol use is deeply entrenched in American society and certainly globally. But I do think that we are at a place in marijuana use where prohibition is sort of falling. And we can see that in this not really domino effect, but really more of like a patchwork effect. And so I do think
Hmm.
that it leaves people in a space where, for instance, I'm from the state of Washington originally, and I lived in a town that was 10 miles from the Oregon border. Not legal
Hmm.
to use marijuana recreationally in Oregon, yes, legal in Washington. So it left this very gray area. Can you purchase and consume in Washington? But then when you go home, if you're still a little high, if you're not even driving, what does that make you? You're suddenly a criminal because you've driven 6 miles. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that patchwork regulation and how it's tied into that propaganda.
Well, um, when you let's see, that's a great question. So one of my favorite things that cannabis has taught me is the difference between federal and state. Like it never really sunk in for me until I was like, oh, okay, so it's okay in this state, but it's not okay in that state. And the act of crossing the state boundaries, that's the trouble. Or, the act of in the air, that's where the federal, and the federal government is laws for every person in the United States, and the state laws are for the people and the people that do business in a particular state. And that's always been very interesting, and I think is a necessary element in the path to legalization, um, because one of the things that happened in 2012 is, like you said, Katie, not a domino effect, but a patchwork effect. And what that meant was that in 2012, when or when Colorado and Washington, two states that do not border each other in the slightest, both the people of those states both voted in the same year. I mean, that really says something about like it's not bordering states. It's not like New California or something. It's two different bodies of people that have decided to take the leap and try what it feels like to have your foot out of the bear trap, if you know what I mean.
Wow.
And so I think that we're lucky that it's happened in a patchwork effect. We're also able to see, and I'm grateful to Washington and Colorado. I too grew up in Washington State, and I was so proud that day that when the voters legalized adult use marijuana, because somebody needs to be willing to make the mistakes and be criticized for, for the first generation of the business and how it gets played. And there's history and there's hard work in that. And there's a very much of a pioneer spirit, which is very suited to the cannabis industry, which is kind of on that, to be the cannabis industry is also the first industry that was formed from a social movement,
Mm.
where people were, we all worked to change the laws because the people and the culture started to change how they saw marijuana, and that the prohibition and the propaganda really did fall to the wayside because, you can call it a drug all you want, but I'm calling it a medicine. It's a medicine for me.
Right.
And when you're able to change the conversation, when you're having a conversation about prohibition in particular, um, that's changing the narrative and providing a different point of view for people to gather around instead of just the propaganda propaganda that is being thrown at them. So I'm grateful for that. And I think also, again, with Colorado and Washington, they both also agreed to try two very different industry models, which I think is interesting because that gives more states an opportunity to see how things work. For example, in Washington state, the tax, the retail sales tax is built into the price of the product. So the customers, if they see $25, that's what they pay. Whereas there's more of a sticker shock price in other states where you don't have that. In Colorado, they were like, it's a vertically integrated model, which if you're going to own the business, then you also have to grow at least 70% of your flowers. So you better have enough money to have a cultivation center, and then you might as well add a production, and so you can kind of vertically integrate your money, and while at the same time allowing voters and citizens to grow the plant themselves at home. Whereas Washington state was like, well, okay, we're actually, instead, we're going to make a wholesale market. So we're going to have growers who only do grow and only work business to business, or manufacturers. And that's how we're going to get products to market. But we're not going to allow the consumer to grow their own plants, which is its own silly, it's like, what? Are you kidding? I always say, I like to grow tomatoes on my back porch, but I also will go to the grocery store for ketchup, you know?
Yes, that's a great analogy. Yeah, at
Did
least
that answer your question?
yeah, yeah. So I really love that you keep bringing up the discussion about propaganda. So I come from the substance use disorder and mental health recovery field, and
Mm-hmm.
talking about cannabis, I also partake in cannabis as part of my recovery plan because it helped me
Mm-hmm.
move forward in not only my mental health but my physical recovery. And so I completely buy into this, and I'm so happy to see regulations coming forward and the
Mm-hmm.
now harm reduction approach as opposed to abstinence only. And so, talking about that is
100%.
really important in where we are in unwhelming to talk about, where are we? Where are we coming from to understand the shame and stigma associated with cannabis use and how that was
That's
something
right.
created by the government. Because this is a cultural medicinal herb, like you said, something that people have used for many, many years. They turned it around because
Yeah.
they wanted to take away the cultural leverage that had with people in a way of acculturation for society itself. And they started, you talked about reefer madness, and one of the biggest things
Mm-hmm.
introducing cannabis to the war on drugs was the belief and the story that the government created that it caused black men to want to have sex with white women. And so when we
Yep. Mongrels. Yep.
yeah, then how that changes the stigma and shame associated with cannabis use. Now that we're breaking that down and saying it's complete bullshit, and we can see how, it was
Mm-hmm.
a patriarchal system that capitalism, they couldn't make money off of a medicinal plant. So they had to get
Yep.
rid of it, regulate it until they could learn how to make money off of it. And so, it helps us in unwhelming a lot of things of saying, what are the systems of oppression in a patriarchal community that are leading us to feel this shame in utilizing cannabis when it's so wonderful for so many of us in helping us find recovery. And
Oh
what
my
does
gosh.
that mean
It's
now?
everything.
Oh yeah, we're going from abstinence now to harm reduction and
Yeah.
education, and that's where it leads into you and the regulation and the understanding of that. What do you see that as mean
Mm-hmm.
for other controlled substances such as mushrooms? Yeah, because those have great recovery.
Well, I think definitely. Oh golly, don't threaten me with a good time. I think that psychedelic mushrooms are fantastic, and I think it's so exciting to see what is happening in states like Oregon. And there's a dispensary here who have made a part of their marketing plan to proudly share that they're donating 10% of their retail sales to psychedelic research. I
Nice.
think that's really kind of cool. And I never really knew like veterans to a real degree until I moved out here. I live out in Western Mass in the Berkshires and have met some really incredible veterans whose lives have been saved,
Yes.
saved. And I mean, saved. And their families have been saved. And it's a wonderful thing, with, I was going to say, for me, with my kids, what I have done with, because I've been raising kids this whole time. And, I really got involved in the reform movement when they were like 6 and 10. And so for the bulk, for all of their adolescence, they have known about marijuana. And we've talked about it as in terms of it being a civics issue, that no one, our conversation is that nothing is inherently good or bad, right? And, in a society, we agree to live by a set of laws, and the people that are the people that show up write the laws. And when you don't like the laws, you can take the following steps to change those laws. And we talked a lot about the arbitrariness of that we lived at the time in southern New Hampshire. And so just 10 miles down across the Massachusetts border, it was, you'd get in more trouble for letting your dog take a leak against a tree in Boston Common, but I'd be a federal offense in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So, and I think also it's just an incredibly, like what Amy Poehler was talking about in her book, Yes, Please, which is such a great book. Amy Poehler's such a great book. She said that, her dad was always the one that was ready to go for ice cream and didn't mind waiting in the car. And, she never had to bring kids into her house when her parents were fighting or screaming or drunk, or that it was just a, peaceful, easy feeling. So, by the way, I have a little joke with my name, Susie Kandt. I like to say I'm the Leslie Knope of the cannabis industry. If you know, if you know about Parks and Rec.
Until I see your binders, Susie.
I've got binders, but because I still am in desperate need of strategic planning and hoping they are actually stored in doom boxes. They're empty and stored in doom boxes, all my binders, but I want to be the Leslie Knope of the cannabis industry.
We know, we will probably help you out there.
Yeah.
I want to talk,
Go ahead.
we briefly mentioned the stigmatization and the socialization of marijuana use as it pertains to Black men. And that was a very deliberate source of messaging, rather a deliberate piece of messaging from the government,
Just
right?
brown skin. Yeah, brown skin. That's why they called it marijuana, because it sounded more Mexican.
Yeah, I mean, I want to also point out that in addition to being racist and patriarchal, that it is deeply, deeply colonial. So in a colonial model, you not only move in and take over resources, but you move in and you eradicate anything that came before you that doesn't look like you. And so if the people using marijuana are not only don't look like the titled white men in power, they also can be further disenfranchised because marijuana laws became this incredibly harsh sentencing tool in the Reagan era to put men of color in particular away for a very, very long time. Incredibly disproportionate.
Yeah, and just to fill the coffers of the the privately owned prisons.
Yeah.
I had a great friend, a wonderful woman, who told this terrible story about how she got kind of roped up in a drug bust from her boyfriend, and had to spend like 3 nights in jail down in the 1970s and the early 70s in New York City. And she had her period, and they just all laughed at her and mocked her. And I was telling my friend about it, and he said she was one of the very first women, once that's how the drug war really cranked up, was to kind of just now we can go and bring in their girlfriends and bring in all of the extra ancillary people that were even in the apartment, lock them up.
Yeah.
It's been a shit show. Oh, white man.
Joe said, I'm just not even going to watch today. It'll be all my fault.
No, it's not your fault. Not you, white man.
Well, this is what we say. It's not your fault, but now you get a chance to fix it. But I do want to ask you, because you've been in the work of normalizing marijuana use and marijuana laws, I'd like to ask you about the role of women in that grassroots movement, because as you say, they were used as pawns and basically used as tools and leverage against men in the trade and in the culture of usage. Can you talk about their role, particularly in the normalization of marijuana use?
Well, sure. I mean, I think that the real turning point for America, anyway, for medical marijuana, when you look back on it, you'll see that medical marijuana really owes its roots to the AIDS movement in the early, just at the heart of the 80s and the AIDS movement. Uh, and there were men and women of all kinds, but there was one gal that she would make all kinds of brownies, grandma something. I can't remember her name. I wasn't expecting to talk about grandma. Uh, it's true that the bulk of the people that have the activists that have changed the laws in marijuana are white men, mostly lawyers, you know. And I would say also that what the white man is definitely ruling the planet in terms of the operational and organizational pieces of it now that the industry's getting going. Um, uh, as for you know women, like I had said earlier, women we're the center of our communities, and we're the ones that our people turn to. And so uh, that's another reason why I share my views about cannabis in the manner that I do, is because I see it as like a ring or a force, like a positive force uh, for anyone and everyone. Like, you tell me what your ailment, you tell me where you're hurting, and I will tell you how it can help you. And I want to spread that because it's a great way to help people,
Oh,
and people who help people are the helpfulest people.
yeah. Absolutely. Well, I think it's interesting that as in so many other places, women's place within the movement has been characterized by behind the scenes, by supportive roles, by grassroots organizing, by, as you
Hmm.
mentioned in the beginning of the program, you talked about how women are looked to in their communities for education about cannabis use, education about laws, about reform. And that's because they're trusted members of the community. So I think that
Hmm.
women have a particularly important role to play. And we always say do business like a girl. So, leverage your strengths. So if that's a place where women can be recognized, it's a jumping off point to begin to take more of the leadership roles within policy movement and
For
within
sure.
legal.
For sure. For sure. And I think it's also, Mary Jane, it's the she's female, the cannabis, like that's what we're talking about, the female plant. So that is a really kind of empowering kind of like vagina kind of feeling.
Absolutely.
I am life,
The
you
very
know.
appropriation of the female symbol is incredibly important. If I can just, dive deeper
It's
into
everything.
sociology in a way that, marijuana and Mary Jane have been cast as the devil's lettuce and as temptresses,
Yeah.
sirens, to reappropriate the female flower for females
Hmm.
to take that power and to say, we won't be shamed by this. We
Oh
will
yeah.
be empowered by this. That's incredibly important. I want to pause for
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
I know that there are some
Can
Facebook
I?
comments and some other
Oh.
and Elise, because I'm not wearing my glasses, Elise is in charge of reading those. So I wonder if you can
Hmm.
some of those comments or capture some
So
of
what you're
what's
saying is I
happening.
am your glasses.
You are my seeing eye
Okay.
person today.
Good
Yes.
to know. We have a comment that comes from Lisa. Thank you so much for being here, Lisa. We appreciate you. But she says
Yeah.
it's cultural and it can be helpful in medicinal form. It's a helpful conversation because cannabis has a range of potency and form, and just because it's a plant doesn't mean it's always helpful. The removal of stigma will hopefully lead to further education because I know people have used very potent strains and forms of cannabis and now live with major depression and schizophrenia as a result. Some of them too young to make an informed choice of what may be detrimental to them. And so again, it's thank you for creating this space, Susie and Katie, and with Unwhelm. So
Hmm.
educate. When we take away the stigma associated with something, the shame associated with it, we can have open conversations to educate and support one another, to advocate for healthy use and for full understanding of what it is, to let
Exactly.
know that under 25, cannabis use is not recommended. Your brain's still developing.
That's
Without
right.
public service campaigns, without you going out there and educating the community, there are detrimental effects that are being seen in British Columbia, like Lisa's saying, in the hospitals and in the community there. So what you're doing in the
Hmm.
education providing is so deeply needed right now, since we are seeing it, kind of come to the cultural forefront of what we're doing.
Right. And we're also like, we are having to tear down the prohibition and tease apart what is real and what were lies about the plant and how it helps or hurts people. That is definitely a huge part of the work that we're doing.
I do.
That's what this conversation's about. So great.
Yeah, I want to share just as briefly as I can my own personal story of my family. And my husband and I, between us, have 5 kids, and 2 of them started using marijuana in high school, like so many of us do. But I'd like to tie in how the prohibition and the dare messaging really pushed them in a direction that they didn't need to go. So our oldest daughter, bought some shady shit off some dude, and it was laced with God knows what, and she had a terrible experience, and it did do exactly what Lisa's talking about. She used something that was she had no idea how to use it responsibly. No one had ever talked with her about it, and she ended up really pushed in the direction of mental illness and struggles with that today. Our son
Hmm.
also, we were talking about this in a recent visit, and we were saying, the message was that marijuana was a gateway drug. And he said something that was really interesting to me. He's just turning 21, and he said, I would say marijuana use is a gateway culture, which was, it kind of stopped me in my tracks. And I thought, well, it is if we continue to push the message that marijuana is bad and dirty and illegal, instead of having conversations. As kids, you grow up around alcohol use, and if you're fortunate enough, you have access to people who model responsible alcohol use or moderation. You, as a child, if you are only ever told that it is binary, it's on or off, yes or no, then you're never exposed to responsible usage. So if you are forced into dark corners and shady ass deals, then of course it's a gateway culture to other substances that you also have no idea how to handle. And so I want
Yeah, I think, yeah,
to
I
ask.
think, well, it makes me think, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
That's okay. I want to ask you about that that shroud of secrecy, because one of the things that when you and I first talked about it, this conversation, you said it's really important to talk about how coming out as a marijuana user, a cannabis user, is
Hmm.
so important to your mental health. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
Okay, well, yeah. For one thing, I think that one of my favorite facts about cannabis is that it's social, it's rooted in community. Like there's nothing about the cannabis plant or flower that tells you that if you set fire to it and inhale the smoke, you will have psychoactive effects. Like that needed to be passed from one human to another, which is the foundation of community and socializing, right? And so uh, to have joined that community of responsible cannabis users, right, wrong, or indifferent, right, um, are I feel so much more authentic, and it is like coming out. It is like saying I am who I am, and that's what I'm out. It's who I am, and that's that. And it helps me feel better. And I feel like by living exactly who I am, I invite other people to do that as well.
Yeah.
And then also the people that I've met in the cannabis community themselves, they're just wonderful, wonderful people. And again, the number of women I've met who had real heavy drinking problems, right? Because it's hard out there for a girl trying to get it all done and be everything. It's real hard, and it's real easy to turn to booze. But as you know, women in particular, being the center of the family, it's a lot more traumatic to a family to have a mom who's a heavy drinker as opposed to a dad who's a heavy drinker, especially if the dad works out of the house. And you know, it's just, it really eats at things. And so to have a healthy way to enrich and soothe is fantastic, and I think everybody should try it. And I think also that, today, especially in the States where it's legal in today's modern world, I have a saying of wherever you meet to raise a glass, consider instead to puff puff pass. Like
Yeah.
a lot of more people than would be so much more happy to see a little tray of edibles or a couple of pre-rolls than a whole thing of Heinekens. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
so much easier. You wake up so refreshed. You don't have to forget or regret what you did that night. So a lot of women who turn to cannabis because of their drinking, wanting to dial back their drinking, have been very glad. It was the beginning of their greatest joy.
I do. Thank you.
So
I think
yeah, that's my answer. Oh, and I guess as far as really coming out, I began by wearing T-shirts with marijuana leaves on them when I'd go to the grocery store.
yeah. Did you find that was a
And
conversation opener for you?
yeah, for sure. I never got stink eye once, not from anybody. I
Yeah.
had one lady ask me if I was from Canada because it was at a maple leaf. And I was like, no. And then, but mostly I would get soft spoken compliments and like quietly smiling people in
Right.
line. I like your shirt.
The nudge
And
win.
then I get to say, yeah, if we only would, imagine if we all turn green for a day. And then that kind of,
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think it's really,
yeah, yeah.
you brought up something that's really important because Elise has cut her teeth in the recovery and mental health space, and
Yeah, I got something to say about that. Go ahead.
I've done some work, not as a recovery coach or supporting recovery, but rather supporting nonprofit organizations who do the work, and I do see
Hmm.
an incredibly large divide that is a zero tolerance model versus a harm reduction model. And I want to reiterate what Lisa said, that you're bringing this to the fore so that we have a safe space to have a conversation about the appropriate use
Hmm.
of cannabis in a recovery program. And I want to say that I stopped drinking in 2019, and I was what some people might call it early Exeter. I preferred to call myself an alcoholic light. So, just what I developed, what I felt was an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, and that I too use cannabis
Hmm.
as part of my recovery program. I use it for sleep, and it helps me in a way that nothing else has. Not over the counter medications. It has been an integral part in my own recovery. So, and I live with a recovering alcoholic of 26 years. Sorry, babe, I can't remember how many years. This might be 28 this year. And he was, of course, brought into the Alcoholics Anonymous model of recovery, which is a very
Hmm.
hardcore zero tolerance. His
Hmm.
model came from that. And so, he and I have a difference of opinion on cannabis usage. But I'd love to hear what you have to say about the use of cannabis within the recovery sphere.
Thank you. I do too. So my business partner, he's the director of education. He recently completed an alcohol detox program and just finished, the 90 days of meetings, and he was in the thick of it. And he's a sociologist who studies marijuana and had no intention of stopping marijuana, his usage of marijuana during the time that he was uh, you know, once he left the detox facility. And it has brought up a very interesting uh, dichotomy or schism, right? Where the culture is changing faster than the laws and the systems.
Mm,
And so, for example, in his case, the question is like he has to take a P test every X number of days or whatever it is. And every single time, like he said he would from the start, and every time they addressed it with him, he would say, I'm absolutely going to. I am, this will happen.
Yeah.
And yet they stopped kind of hassling him about it. And so he's wondering, like, well, how is that going to work for insurance? Are they going to fudge and say that I did pass?
Yeah.
Or, it creates a real complicated nut that I bet is going to take more than a few weekend retreats of smart people to figure out. But yeah, so yeah, and it's tricky because it's perfectly legal and it's so much safer than any other kind of any kind of intoxicant. And people have been wanting to escape reality from the beginning of time, from time to time. So, and it's the plant has been here from the beginning of time.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I know that
I don't know. It seems, and cannabinoids stay in your system for 30 days. I think that's because they need to. It's good for them. It's good for you.
One of the pieces that has come up for me over and over is people that I know personally who struggle with ADHD. And for instance, our son turned to marijuana first when he was young because he was tired of being on high doses of Adderall and its cousins, and he wanted to stop taking those medications, and he hated the side effects. But of course, he couldn't get support within the insurance and the medical industry to come off of those medications safely. So he started turning to marijuana, and he told us once that the reason he smoked so much was because it slowed the world down for him. And I have another friend who is very clear that marijuana usage in whatever form she uses, whether it's edibles or vaping or smoking, that for her, that manages her ADHD and allows her to focus in a way that she can't with Adderall, or that she can't, by just white knuckling it. And so I wonder if you want to talk about, in your experience, what kind of similar stories you've heard.
Well, I was realizing today that I realize I'm kind of lucky that for me, embracing cannabis is like my preferred hyperfixation. Like I can hyperfixate on all things cannabis. And I'm grateful that I have like a vessel to fill in terms of like always staying interested, but getting lots of different opportunities to do different things. Yeah, I have definitely heard lots of anecdotal evidence of folks where, just like you say, that it helps them slow down and it kind of soothes the monkeyed mind. And then I've also, I also am from the school that I think that the varieties of strains available for cannabis so you can't, just because I smoke weed, well, if you're really going to get interested in what products work for you, then you're going to need to learn more about terpenes and flavonoids and the cannabinoid profiles of the strains that you like, and kind of disconnect yourself from the importance of THC percentages and really dial into what works for you specifically. And then, and that's kind of when you cross the line to from recreation to wellness, in my mind, which is when you become like, I'm using it as a supplement to my life.
Well, and that's the beauty
and
an opportunity is now we can go out and ask at the dispensaries. You don't have to just take whatever somebody hands you when you're doing your backyard.
Exactly.
That's how I learned.
And it's tested.
Ask questions. Yes. Right. It's regulated in that way. You know what's coming in your strain. You know about the terpenes. You know if it's going to be pain relief, if it's going to be anxiety relief or appetite. Those things, making it useful.
Yeah. And exactly. And then even then, the other layer of education I like to be able to bring is to then, to point out, and even then what works for me may not work for you, because there's so many other variables contextually, that mean it's a crapshoot until we dial in on our relationship with the plant. So that's another element where I would like to tell customers, like, just because the product doesn't work for you doesn't mean that it's defective. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
it's never marijuana's fault. Like, she may be the big kid, the big girl in the room when you go in to break up the fight, and you may say, well, yeah, I was drunk, but I'd had some dope that day, and that's why I tore her weave out. It's like, no, marijuana didn't make you pull that weave out. You know, that was the entourage effect of the booze and anyways, weaves.
I really appreciate. I want to just let our audience know that Susie has put together some educational materials that we will post on the Unwhelm Coaching website. So we will also make sure that her contact information is available to you. And in fact, Susie, if you wouldn't mind just dropping that in chat, your website and
Sure.
contact information. I know Susie to be
Hmm.
incredibly empathetic and so smart and so perceptive that I absolutely know that if you have a question, she will answer it thoughtfully and with the full
100%.
giant brain behind it. And she's an incredible resource.
Hmm.
So we at the Unwhelmed community are really grateful to have this incredibly rich resource available to us. And so I want to reiterate that further will be added to our Unwhelmed directory, which is accessible through your free membership. We are building
Yeah,
out.
we can do online seminars. We
Yeah,
can do all kinds of things. We can do all the different ways.
yeah,
We
absolutely.
teach, you grow.
Right on. So if you are a business owner or if you're growing an organization and you want to start to have that conversation with colleagues, clients, employees, bosses, Susie is a really great entry point because she comes with the credibility of state certification, with gobs of education, and she's incredibly eloquent, obviously. So this is one way that you can
Darn.
open that conversation in your business, and you can embrace the coming out as a cannabis user, and you can educate yourself to be a resource for other people. And I want to of course caution everyone that we are not attorneys, and we none of us are qualified to give you legal advice on
Sure, sure.
consumption of marijuana or its related products or any other cannabinoids in states where it is not legal. Blah, 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 blah. Please consult an attorney. Do not rely on anything you've heard in this broadcast for legal guidance. We encourage you to educate yourself. But if what you're interested in doing is elevating the conversation, and if you are interested in smashing the stigma, in breaking that code of silence and secrecy, welcome. This is what we do at Unwhelmed Coaching. We talk about the shit that people aren't talking about. So I want to really advocate for you to continue to educate yourself and to just have this conversation. And Susie, we just have a few more minutes. And so I wonder if you can give us some, I don't know, talking points or tips for if that conversation comes up and you find somebody who is an absolute closed door, someone who has an absolute zero tolerance and just doesn't want to talk about it. Can you give us some tips for gracefully exiting that conversation with integrity?
Sure. I guess, well, I guess my first reaction is, I guess I'd try, oh, okay. Right?
Right, right.
Oh, okay. No problem. More for me. Haha. Um, uh, one, but I guess tips. I mean, first, if I am entering into, I mean, it's tricky for me because I'm in the industry, right? So, like, I can write off the expense of going in and shaking people's hands at a dispensary when I buy their dope, and you
Mhm.
know, I have that going for me. So, I think fundamentally that coming out about your cannabis use to anybody that you want to is your own personal decision that you kind of have to work through. It's a choice to make. How comfortable are you? For a lot of people, it's like, I'm not telling them when I'm doing laundry. I'm not telling my boss when I'm watching Netflix or going for a ride with my friend. Why would I tell them I'm going for a bone cruise or I got stoned last night? Like it's none of their business.
Yeah.
So it really all kind of depends on that. But then, like with coworkers, I have, I have alluded to behavior that was perfectly legal in the state that I claimed it was in to see if I got any kind of sniffles or,
Mm.
you know, there's, I'd heard recently, well, somebody asked me recently, do you smoke? And I was like, I don't smoke marijuana. I mean, I don't smoke cigarettes. And then later I read an article online saying that that's kind of the way that a lot of heroin users try to find each other is to ask the question, do you smoke? And they're like, you get three answers. The first one is smoke what? And then that's your clue to like, all right, you can now go to the next level of questions to find out. But if they say not tobacco, then they only smoke dope and they don't know what you're talking about. And then, I smoke cigarettes, and then they don't smoke anyway. So
Well, it's
uh,
interesting. It's like there's a code, and you can sort of feel your way with code, and I think that.
that's the foundation of illicit drugs and consensual deviancy, right?
Well, when you talked about wearing your
Find the language.
right, to make sort of signals that you are a safe person to talk to about it, and I think that
Hmm.
that you made a really good point of finding and establishing your own comfort level and then owning it. It's not your responsibility
Hmm.
to make other people comfortable with your choices, for sure. I
It
see.
really isn't. What other people think of me is none of my business. It's not my concern.
We're gonna get that on t-shirts, I'm telling you. We are out of time.
Trademark.
It, we're out of time.
Trademark.
Conversation is just beginning, and I'm sure we're going to check in with Susie in the future. And again, she'll be a resource to you. So this is the point in the program where we pitch Unwhelm Coaching, and you go to unwhelmcoaching.com. For a free account, you have access to our Unwhelm directory. You can access all of the materials that come along with these Unwhelminars. We are here every Friday at 11 Mountain Time. Whatever that means for you, you're going to have to Google that because time is just a construct, as we all know. Thank you so much, Susie. It's always fantastic to spend time with you and to really
Amen.
uncover this level of expertise and share it with our community is such a gift.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah, you
Stay
bet.
high, everybody, or not, depending on your choice.
Thank you so much. Have a good Friday, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Oh, hey, we're getting unwhelmed.
And as always, you can catch all of our recordings on our website at unwhelmcoaching.com.